They took my chair first, then they took my seat at the table. Then my own son opened his mouth in front of 18 guests. He said I could eat after they left. My hands stayed steady the whole time. I refilled every glass before I ever touched my own plate. None of them saw what that steadiness was holding down. Somewhere in a drawer 3 feet away, a deed sat with only one name on it. It was not his. By the next Thanksgiving, that same son would read his own signature out loud in front of the same 12 people and finally understand exactly what he'd signed away 3 years before he ever opened his mouth. But that comes later. Let me take you back. Mom can eat after the guests leave, Marcus said. He didn't even lower his voice. Behind him, 12 people I had fed at that table for 20 years kept right on passing the rolls. Nobody stopped chewing. Nobody looked at me twice. Ashley, my son's wife, smiled down at her plate like he'd said something clever about the weather. I stood at the head of my own dining room, in the house on Belhaven Road, a platter of cornbread dressing warm against my wrist. I did what I have done my whole life when a room decides not to see me. I kept moving. Sure, baby, I said. Y'all eat. My name is Deborah Faye Whitcomb. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years balancing drug counts on a hospital ward in Macon, Georgia, down to the last pill. I never once let a number slide past me unaccounted for. I raised my son alone after his father died, on a clerk's paycheck, in this house, on this road, in Cedar Hollow. It's a town small enough that everybody at that table had grown up 2 streets from somebody else at it. I did not raise my voice that night. I never do. I set the dressing down. I filled the sweet tea pitcher. I let my son's cruelty sit in the room the way you let a stain sit before you treat it. You learn that on a hospital floor. The wrong move at the wrong moment only sets it deeper. I did not eat that night until 11 o'clock. I stood alone at my own kitchen counter. I was not surprised. I had been watching this exact moment build for 2 years, one small brick at a time. I had already done something about it. Neither Marcus nor Ashley knew it existed. I am going to tell you what it was. But first, you need to know how a woman raises a man who could say a sentence like that to his own mother in her own house, and how she ends up holding a piece of paper that says the house was never his to give away. My husband was named Wendell Whitcomb. He built the front porch with his own 2 hands the summer Marcus was born. He cut the boards himself out back with a borrowed saw. He hummed church songs while he worked because he could never carry a tune and never once cared. Wendell drove a delivery route for a feed company for 30 years. I worked the overnight desk at Cedar Hollow Memorial. Between the two of us, we paid this house off 11 years before he passed. We never had much. We had enough. We had each other. We had a boy who used to sit on that porch with his father, handing him nails one at a time like it was the most important job in the world. Wendell died on a Tuesday in March, quiet, in his sleep, his heart giving out the way tired hearts do. I did not fall apart. I could not afford to. I made the calls I needed to make. I picked the suit he was buried in. I kept paying the mortgage every single month afterward on my own paycheck for 11 straight years. That was the promise I made him at his graveside, without saying a word out loud. This house would stand. This house would be paid for. This house would still smell like his coffee in the morning. Marcus was 26 when his father died. He grieved hard. I let him. I never once told him what it cost me to keep the roof over both our heads while he found his footing. That was not information a mother hands her son like a bill. You carry what you carry. You let your children believe the ground under them was always solid. That is the whole point of raising them right. I worked that overnight desk for 31 years. It matters to everything that came after. I logged medication counts, admissions, discharges, incident reports. It's the quiet machinery that keeps a hospital honest at 3 in the morning. The doctors go home. Only the night staff is left holding the building together. I counted controlled substances to the pill, twice a shift. I signed my initials next to every count. In 31 years, not one single count of mine was ever found short. Not one. Some nurses liked me for it. Some doctors resented it. A clerk who never makes a mistake makes it harder for anyone else to explain one away. Being right, quietly and consistently, earns you exactly as many enemies as it does allies. I learned that early. I raised Marcus mostly alone. Wendell drove his route 6 days a week, up before dawn, home after dark. The two of us kept the house running on a schedule with little room for anything but the essentials. I packed his lunch every morning in the same brown paper bag, folded twice at the top, the way my own mother folded mine. I sat up with him through fevers. I sat up with him through the year he struggled with reading. I drove him to a tutor 2 towns over every Tuesday for 11 months. The letters finally settled into words the way they should have from the start. I never once told him what any of it cost me. Not the gas money, not the sleep I gave up. A mother who counts her sacrifices out loud to her own child has already lost something more valuable than the sacrifice itself. He married Ashley 4 years later. She grew up 2 counties over, in a bigger town, with a father who owned a car lot. From the very first Sunday dinner, I could see her measuring my house the way you measure a coat that almost fits. She was polite to my face. She called me Miss Deborah, which I appreciated. She brought a bottle of wine every visit like she was checking a box on a form. But I noticed things. I have always noticed things. I noticed how she looked at the china cabinet like she was already deciding where her own dishes would go. I noticed how she asked, more than once in that light, casual voice people use, whether the house was paid off, whether it was in my name alone, whether Marcus was on anything. I told her the truth, mostly. I told her the house was paid off. I did not tell her the rest. That was none of her business yet. A woman my age learns to keep her cards close, even at her own dinner table. I remember one dinner in particular, early, maybe 8 months before the wedding. Ashley asked me directly, over dessert, why I still worked part-time at the hospital's records office. The house was paid off. I could have simply stopped. I like having my own money, I told her. That was true. It was also not the whole answer. My mother worked until she was 71, and her mother before her worked until the day she died. And I come from women who understood that a paycheck is a kind of dignity all its own, separate from need. But you don't need it, she said, smiling, the way people smile when they think they are being helpful instead of intrusive. Marcus says you're very comfortable. It seems like you could enjoy your retirement more. Comfortable and independent aren't the same thing, I said. I intend to stay both for as long as the good Lord allows it. She laughed, a light social laugh, and changed the subject to the wedding flowers. I let her. Ashley measured comfort in numbers. I measured it in something she had not yet learned to count. Marcus watched that exchange the way he watched most things between his wife and his mother in those early years, quietly, saying nothing, hoping the 2 women he loved most would find their own rhythm without his help. They did not really, not in the way he hoped, but I gave them my blessing anyway. I danced with my son at his wedding. I told him, the night before, exactly what I tell every young person I love before they marry. Marriage is a ledger, baby, I said. Not a cruel one, a true one. Make sure you both know what's going in and what's coming out. Make sure neither one of you is keeping score in secret. Secret scores are the ones that bankrupt a family. He hugged me and told me he understood. I believed him. Some part of me still believes he meant it that night, even knowing everything I know now about the years that followed. Ashley owned a small interior design business downtown, a showroom on Cotton Avenue with her name painted gold on the window. She talked about it constantly: clients, fabric swatches, a big contract she was always about to land. I believed her, the way you believe family. Doubting people is exhausting, and I had chosen a long time ago to spend my energy on kindness instead of suspicion. 3 years ago, Marcus asked me to co-sign a loan against the house. He came to dinner with a folder, the way his wife might have taught him. He laid it on my table and called it an investment opportunity, something Ashley's showroom needed, a line of credit that would only ever be a formality. He said the house was the best collateral we had, sitting there paid off and doing nothing. I said no. I did not say it unkindly. I said it the way I say most things, flat and level, the way I used to tell a doctor a number was wrong before he signed off on it. I told my son this house was the one thing standing between our family and nothing. I was not going to gamble it on a business I did not understand the books of. He was angry that night. He called me stubborn. He said I did not trust him. I told him trust and collateral were two different things, and that I loved him enough to say no to his face instead of letting him find out the hard way what a bank does to a paid-off house when a business goes under. He left angry. He came back a week later, quieter, and never asked again. Nobody knew, except one man in this town, that his asking had scared me enough to act. 2 weeks after that dinner, I drove to see Harold Denby, the attorney who has kept our family's papers since before Marcus was born. I told Harold I wanted the deed moved fully and finally into my name alone. Recorded, certified. No path for anyone to borrow against it without my direct signature. In his office, in front of him, on paper, he would keep a copy of himself. Harold asked me why. I told him I had a feeling, the same feeling I used to get on a hospital floor right before something went wrong. A small change in the air that tells you to check the chart twice. He did not argue with me. He drew up the transfer that same month. I signed it. He filed it with the county. He kept a certified copy in his own office safe. Harold Denby has practiced law in Cedar Hollow for 38 years. He has watched enough families come apart over houses to know that paper only protects you if somebody besides you can produce it. That was 3 years ago. Nobody at my table that Thanksgiving night knew a single word of it. 6 months after that, Marcus and Ashley moved in with me. They called it helping. Ashley said the market was hard on young couples. It only made sense to save while they got established. I said yes because he is my son, and because this house had gone quiet in a way that ached after Wendell passed. I told myself a mother who would not open her door to her own child had lost something worth more than her quiet. I gave them the 2 back bedrooms. I gave them the second bathroom. I told myself it was temporary. It was not temporary. Ashley redecorated the sitting room within the first 2 months. New curtains, new lamps, my own mother's quilt folded into a closet without asking. She called it freshening things up. I said nothing. It was still my house, and I told myself curtains were a small thing to lose if it meant keeping my son close. But curtains became furniture. Furniture became the good china, which Ashley started using for her own dinner parties, inviting her design clients over for wine while I sat in my bedroom with the door closed, listening to laughter that used to be the sound of my own home. I kept every receipt. Old habits. 31 years counting pills taught me that the truth lives in the paper trail. Some part of me, the part that had already gone to see Harold Denby, understood I was building something, even before I let myself say the word out loud. The word was a case. My cousin Yolanda noticed before I let myself admit it out loud. She has lived 3 houses down on Bellhaven Road since before either of us had children. She has sat in the pew behind me at Mount Nebo every Sunday for 40 years. She came by one afternoon that first autumn with a plate of deviled eggs. She stayed long enough to watch Ashley redirect 2 of my own dining chairs into the sitting room without asking. "Deborah Fay," Yolanda said once we were alone on the porch, "how long are you going to let that girl move your furniture around like you're the guest in your own house?" "She's finding her feet," I said. "It's an adjustment for both of them." Yolanda gave me the look she has been giving me since we were girls sharing a bed at her grandmother's house during the summers. The look that says she has known me too long to accept the answer I am offering. "You raised money for the church roof fund, $1 at a time for 6 years. Deborah Fay Whitcomb. $6,200. I remember, because I counted the jar with you every single month. You do not strike me as a woman who loses track of what's hers by accident." I did not answer her directly that day, but Yolanda's question sat with me longer than almost anything else said to me that whole difficult year. She was right. Some part of me had already begun keeping the ledger, even before I called it that out loud. There was a smaller moment that same week. I have never told anyone until now. I came home from the grocery store on a Thursday afternoon and found Ashley had rearranged my kitchen cabinets while I was out. She'd moved my pots and pans to make room for a set of copper cookware she'd ordered online. She'd slid my own mother's cast iron skillet, the one I have cooked breakfast in every morning for 30 years, to the very back of the bottom shelf, where I would have to kneel to reach it. I stood in that kitchen a long moment, looking at the empty space where my skillet used to hang on its hook. I felt something small and sharp move through me, something I did not yet have a name for. I did not say anything to Ashley that evening. I simply waited until she and Marcus had gone to bed. I moved my skillet back to its hook, quietly in the dark, the way I had started doing most things by then. I stood there afterward with my hand resting on the worn wooden handle. I thought about my mother's hands on that same handle, her mother's hands before that, 3 generations of women in my family who had cooked in this town, in this state, on stoves not so different from mine. None of them had ever once needed anybody's permission to keep their own kitchen arranged the way they needed it. I hung the skillet back on its hook. I did not mention it to Ashley the next morning. She did not mention the copper pots either. We moved around each other in that kitchen for the rest of that autumn with a particular careful silence. 2 women who both knew exactly what happened. Both decided, for their own reasons, not to be the one who says it first. The copper cookware sat mostly unused after that, still boxed in the pantry corner, and my cast iron did the actual cooking every single morning, the way it always had, the way it always would. By the second winter, the arrangement had cost me more than curtains. I calculated it once, late one night with a cup of tea and my reading glasses, the way I calculate everything, in a column, dated. The grocery bill had crept up nearly $400 a month, feeding 2 more adults. The utility bill had climbed almost $200, with Ashley's space heaters running through the cold months. I had quietly covered a car repair for Marcus's truck, $680, because he said he couldn't make rent and groceries both. By then he wasn't paying rent anywhere. He was living under my roof, rent-free, telling himself it was temporary the same way I once had. I did not resent giving. A woman can give freely and still keep an honest account of what she has given. Both things can be true in the same breath. I had raised that boy on a nurse's aide's paycheck after Wendell died, stretching $31,000 a year across a mortgage and a growing child and a life that never once felt like enough. I never once regretted a dollar of it. What I began to resent, slowly, the way a splinter you ignore begins to ache, was being told, on top of everything I already gave freely, that I should also be grateful to eat last at my own table. I did not think of it that way at first. I thought of it as keeping track, the way I have always kept track, dating every bill, filing every canceled check in folders in the cabinet in the hall closet, a cabinet nobody in that house but me had ever opened. Blue folders for the household bills I still paid myself. A green folder for the house, the taxes, the insurance, the deed transfer papers Harold had given me a copy of. A folder for Wendell, thin and soft at the edges, that I still could not bring myself to open most months. That Thanksgiving, the one where my son told me I could eat after the guests left, was the first Thanksgiving Ashley hosted her own way. In my house, with her own guests mixed in among ours. People from her showroom, a banker, a woman she called her business partner, 12 people at my table, plus the three of us. Ashley had moved my seat, my actual chair, down to the foot of the table, near the kitchen door, so I could get up easier to help. I noticed. I always notice. I served the whole meal standing, refilling glasses, carrying dishes, answering when spoken to, saying nothing when I was not. When the dressing ran low and I reached to serve myself a plate before the second round went out, that was the moment. That was when my son, in front of his wife's banker and his wife's business partner and 8 other people who had eaten at my table for 20 years, said the sentence I will never stop hearing. Mom can eat after the guests leave. He said it lightly. That was the part that cut the deepest. Lighter than I can describe, the way you'd remind somebody about a small chore. Ashley laughed just a little and looked down at her plate. Not one person at that table said a single word in my defense. 12 people I had fed Thanksgiving dinner for 2 decades kept passing the rolls like nothing had been said at all. I set the dressing back down. I smiled at the banker. I said, "Of course," and I refilled his tea. I did not eat until 11 that night, standing at my own counter, in my own kitchen, in the house Wendell built the porch on with his bare hands. While I stood there, I thought about a certified deed sitting in Harold Denby's office safe, 3 years now, waiting, the way a fire extinguisher waits behind glass, hoping nobody ever needs it, ready the instant somebody does. I did not know yet exactly how bad it had gotten for Ashley's business. I did not know about the loan she had taken out against the showroom, the one she never told anyone about, 4 months behind already. I did not know she had started telling her sister, over the phone, in a voice she thought nobody in the house could hear, that the Bellhaven house was basically ours already, that it was only a matter of time, that old women do not live forever, and paperwork has a way of sorting itself out in a family's favor if you are patient. I did not know all of it that night, but I knew enough. I knew the shape of a thing going wrong the same way I always had, on the ward, in this house, in my own bones. I went to bed that night, in my own room, in my own house, and I slept better than I had in months. For the first time in a long time, I understood exactly what I was dealing with. I already held the one thing that would end it. I should tell you plainly who I am. It matters to how this story sits in the world. I am a black woman, deep brown skin, gray coming in thick at my temples now. Hair I press myself every Sunday morning before church, the way my own mother taught me at a kitchen stove in this same town. I grew up 2 streets from Mount Nebo Baptist. My mother sang alto in the choir there for 40 years. I still sit in the 4th pew from the front every Sunday I am able. My grandmother cleaned houses on the west side of Macon for white families who called her by her first name, and never once asked hers. My mother was the first in our family to hold a job with a badge and a paycheck stub, a switchboard operator at the phone company. I was the first to wear a college class ring, even if it took me 8 years of night school to earn it. I say all this not for pity. I say it because a woman's whole history rides in the room with her, whether anybody else at the table bothers to see it or not. I tell you this because of what happened at the sink that night. Ashley's business partner, a woman named Renee Castellano, had come to that Thanksgiving as a guest of my daughter-in-law. She said something to me while I was rinsing plates, quiet enough that Marcus never heard it. Something I have turned over in my mind every day since. She looked at my hands in the dishwater and said, not unkindly, in the voice people use when they think a compliment excuses a wound, "You people really do have a gift for service, don't you?" She smiled when she said it. She meant it, I believe, as praise. I did not answer her the way I wanted to. I said, I have a gift for showing up, and I kept rinsing plates. 31 years on a hospital floor taught me exactly when a fight is worth having, and exactly when it is worth writing down instead. I wrote it down. I dated it. I put it in the folder with everything else. A woman my age, born where I was born, raised the way I was raised, knows that the sentence spoken quietly in a kitchen carries just as much weight as the sentence shouted at a table. Both of them belong in the record. My mother used to say that dignity is not the absence of insult. Dignity is what you do with your hands while the insult is still hanging in the air. I have spent my whole life proving her right. On the ward at 3 in the morning, when a doctor twice my education raised his voice at me over a chart I had filled out correctly. In the grocery store, when a clerk followed me 2 aisles over for no reason he ever gave. And now, in my own dining room, in the house my husband built the porch on, while my son told me I could eat once his wife's guests were satisfied. I did not raise my voice at the sink that night either. Everything that follows in this story, every folder, every dated receipt, every quiet Tuesday morning drive to a lawyer's office on the square, was built by a woman who had already learned, decades before her son ever opened his mouth at that table, exactly how much a calm face can carry, and exactly how long a patient woman can wait for the paperwork to finally catch up to the truth. The breaker went out during dessert that same Thanksgiving night, right after the sweet potato pie came out. All the lights on the back half of the house dropped at once because Ashley had 4 space heaters running for her guests, who said my house ran cold. Marcus did not get up. He was refilling Renee Castellano's wine and laughing at something the banker said. It was Ashley who turned to me, still holding her fork, and said, "Deborah, would you mind? You know where the box is." I minded. I did not say so. I took the flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I went down to the basement alone, past the water heater Wendell installed himself, past the shelf of paint cans still labeled in his handwriting, to the gray fuse box bolted to the cinder block wall since before Marcus was born. I flipped the breaker. The lights upstairs thumped back on. I heard the table laugh at something, warm and easy, a room enjoying itself without me in it. Before I climbed back up, I did what I always do in that basement, which is nothing, usually. Except that night my flashlight caught the edge of something taped inside the fuse box door. Yellowed, folded twice, tucked where nobody looks, because nobody ever needs to look there twice a year at most. I peeled it loose. Wendell's handwriting, unmistakable. The same hand that used to write my name on birthday cards in block letters, because he said cursive was for people showing off. It was short. Whatever they tell you this house is worth, remember what it cost. Keep the paper safe. W. I stood in that basement a long moment, the flashlight shaking just slightly in my hand, not from fear, from something closer to recognition, the way you feel when a doctor finally says out loud the thing your own body had been telling you for weeks. Wendell had been gone 6 years. He had left me a note in a fuse box, like a man leaving a key under a mat for someone he trusted to eventually need it. I did not understand yet exactly what it meant. I understood enough to fold it back along its creases, put it in my apron pocket, and climb the stairs back into a party that had not noticed I was gone. I did not tell Marcus. I did not tell Ashley. I put the note in the green folder that night, dated in my own hand, December the 24th, and I went to bed. The following March, I drove into town on a Tuesday morning and told Marcus I had a doctor's appointment. That was not entirely a lie. I did have one, later that same afternoon. What I did first was drive to Harold Denby's office on the square, the same office I had visited 3 years before. I asked him to pull the certified copy of the deed transfer from his safe, just to look at it, just to hold it in my own hands and remind myself it was real. Harold obliged me without asking many questions. He never has, not in 38 years. He set the folder on his desk, the deed inside it, my name typed clean across the ownership line, notarized, recorded with the county, dated 3 years back. I read it twice. I always read things twice. "Everything all right at home, Deborah?" he asked me, the way he always does. Gentle, unhurried. "Everything's the same as it's always been," I told him. That was true. It was also, I would learn within a matter of weeks, the last calm sentence I would say in that office for a good while. I drove home that afternoon and put the memory of that visit away, the same place I put everything. Filed, dated, quiet. I did not know yet that Ashley's showroom on Cotton Avenue was already 4 months behind on a loan she had never mentioned to a single person in my house. I did not know she had walked into that loan with her own name and her own signature, promising collateral she did not actually possess. I did not know she had told a loan officer in Macon that her mother-in-law's paid-off house would be available soon enough. "Old women," she had said once to her sister on the phone, "do not live forever. Paperwork sorts itself out eventually in a patient family's favor." I did not know it yet, but I would. Spring turned into summer the way it does in Cedar Hollow, slow and heavy, the window units groaning through July. Life in that house settled into a shape I had learned to live inside. I cooked. I cleaned the parts of the house Ashley did not think to clean. I paid the property tax bill in March like I had for 11 straight years. The receipt filed in the green folder, same as always. I watched my son grow thinner around the eyes and shorter with his temper, snapping at Ashley over things that used to roll off him. I watched Ashley grow busier, more clipped, more likely to take a phone call out on the back porch with the door pulled shut behind her. I did not ask. 31 years on a hospital ward taught me that people tell you the truth eventually, usually by accident, usually at the worst possible hour for them and the best possible hour for you. It happened on a Wednesday evening in August. Hot enough that I had gone out to the porch myself to catch what breeze there was. Ashley did not know I was sitting in the dark corner behind the porch swing when she came out with her phone already to her ear, pacing the boards Wendell had cut with his own hands. "I know what the statement says, Renee. I don't need you to read it to me." Her voice had a pitch I had never heard from her, thin and fast. 4 months. "I know it's 4 months. I'm working on it." A pause, then quieter, meaner. "There's a house, Renee. There's always been a house. It just takes a minute to—" It's not. Marcus's mother is not going to live in that thing forever. And when the time comes, it clears everything, the loan, the interest, all of it, in one motion. Another pause. "No, she doesn't know. Why would she know? It's not her business how we structure our own family's assets." A short, ugly laugh. She raised a son who does what he's told. That's the whole plan, Renee. That's always been the plan. I sat very still in the dark corner of my own porch. I listened to my son's wife describe my death and my house and my son's obedience as a business plan to a woman I had served coffee to on Thanksgiving. I did not confront her. A younger version of me might have stood up right then and let the porch boards announce me. I have spent 31 years learning that the moment you are angriest is the worst possible moment to act. Anger makes you sloppy. Sloppy people leave gaps in the record for someone else to find later. I sat in the dark until she finished the call and went back inside. I sat a while longer still. Then I went in through the kitchen door instead of the porch door, so she would never know I had heard a single word of it. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in my bed, in the room Wendell and I had shared for 31 years, and I put the pieces down in a row, the way I used to lay out a patient's medication chart before a shift change. In order. Dated. Plain. Ashley's business was in trouble. Ashley believed my house was the fix. Ashley had told her business partner, out loud, on my own porch, that the plan required me to be gone, one way or another, sooner rather than later. My son was the instrument of it, obedient, unquestioning, exactly the way she had raised him to be these past years, without my noticing the shape of what she was doing. I thought of Wendell's note in the fuse box. Whatever they tell you this house is worth, remember what it cost. Keep the paper safe. I understood, lying there in the dark, that my husband had somehow seen this coming, years before I did, or something enough like it. The note was not a riddle. It was an instruction. In the morning, I called Harold Denby's office and asked for the first appointment he had. "Everything all right, Deborah?" He asked me again, the same gentle question. Except this time, I did not have the same calm answer ready. "I need you to confirm something for me," I said. "The certified copy of my deed. Is it still in your safe? Untouched? Nobody's asked you about it?" There was a pause on the line. Then Harold's voice came back careful, the way a lawyer's voice goes careful when he senses a question underneath a question. "It's exactly where it's always been. Nobody has asked me about it." "Deborah, is somebody trying to get at that house?" "I believe somebody's been trying for a good while," I told him. "I just didn't have the words for it until last night. I drove into town that same afternoon. I told Harold everything. The loan Ashley had never mentioned, the phone call on the porch, the sentence about my house clearing everything in one motion, the fuse box note from Wendell, finally pulled from the green folder and set on his desk. Harold read it twice, the way I read everything twice. When he looked up, his face had gone the particular still gray of a man who has seen a version of this story too many times in 38 years of practice. "He knew," Harold said quietly, meaning Wendell, "or he suspected enough to protect against it. A man doesn't tape a note like that inside a fuse box unless he's already worried about exactly this." "What do I do?" "You do nothing for now," Harold said. "The deed is sound. It's recorded, it's certified, it's in your name and only your name. Nothing Ashley Whitcomb signs anywhere in this state changes that fact one letter. She cannot mortgage what she does not own. She cannot sell what was never hers to sell. Whatever plan she has built in her head, it runs straight into a wall the moment anyone checks the county record. And the county record has said the same thing for 3 years, then why does it feel like I'm the one in danger?" Harold was quiet a moment. "Because you are the one they're planning around, Deborah. Even if the paper says they can't touch the house. People like that don't always wait on the paper. Sometimes they push. Sometimes they wait for you to get sick, or tired, or scared enough to sign something you shouldn't." He looked at me over his glasses the way he always does when a sentence matters more than the ones around it. Promise me one thing. Don't sign anything in that house without bringing it to me first. Not a form, not a letter, not a single line, no matter who hands it to you or how urgent they say it is. I've never signed anything I didn't read twice, Harold. I know, he said. That's exactly why they'll need you to be tired the one time it counts. I went home that evening and cooked supper the way I always did. Marcus ate at my table without looking up from his phone. Ashley picked at her plate with the particular brightness of a woman performing normal. I served them both. I said nothing. I had already decided, sitting in Harold's office that afternoon, exactly how this was going to end, and exactly how long I was willing to let them believe they still had time. I don't get loud. I get accurate. My mother used to say it a different way, but I learned my own version of it on a hospital floor, counting pills at 2 in the morning while a resident twice my education argued with a chart I had filled out correctly. You do not win an argument by raising your voice. You win it by being right, and by having the paper to prove it, and by waiting for the moment when the paper does all the talking for you. I started keeping a different kind of folder that September. Not the household bills, not the house taxes. Those stayed exactly where they'd always been. This one I labeled Nothing on the Outside, plain manila. Inside it, I began collecting what I quietly noticed. The date Ashley mentioned at supper, that her business partner Renee was handling the paperwork side of things now. The date I found a stack of unopened mail addressed to Ashley from a lender in Atlanta, sitting on the hall table for 3 days before she finally took it upstairs. The date Marcus asked me out of nowhere, over coffee, whether I had ever thought about simplifying things, about maybe putting the house in a trust with him as the trustee, just to make things easier down the road. I told him I'd think about it. I did not think about it. I drove straight to Harold's office instead and told him what my son had asked, word for word, dated. That's not a small question, Harold said. A trustee has control, Deborah. Real control. If you signed that, your son could manage the property however he saw fit. Sell it, borrow against it, all without your day-to-day say-so, depending on how it's worded. Did he show you paperwork? Not yet. When he does, and Deborah, he will, you bring it to me first. Every page. I nodded. Harold added the date to his own file, the way he'd been doing quietly since March. I understood we were building something together now, a record with two keepers instead of one. It felt, for the first time in months, like a small kind of armor. October brought a Sunday dinner I still think about. It was the closest Ashley ever came to slipping in front of me. I had invited her business partner Renee, along with a few of Ashley's clients. A small thing. Nothing like the Thanksgiving crowd. 6 people around my table instead of 18. I served pot roast and green beans and the peach cobbler my own mother taught me to make. Over dessert, I asked Renee, in the mildest voice I owned, how the showroom was doing, whether business had picked up since the summer. Renee's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She glanced at Ashley before she answered, which told me more than any answer could have. We've had a slow stretch, she said. Nothing Ashley can't handle. Of course, I said. I smiled. I refilled her tea the way I refill everyone's tea. I watched Ashley's hand tighten just slightly around her own glass. I let the moment pass without another word. I already had what I needed. A slow stretch. Alone 4 months behind by August was not a slow stretch by October. It was a business already underwater, and everyone at that table but me was still pretending otherwise. Marcus caught my eye once during that dinner, briefly. Something crossed his face I could not quite name. Not guilt exactly. more like a boy standing at the top of a staircase he already suspects is missing a step. I have wondered since whether some part of him knew what Ashley was building and chose, the way he chose so many things those 2 years, to look away from it rather than ask the question that would have made him responsible for the answer. I did not blame him entirely, not even then. I raised that boy. I know the difference between a man who is cruel by nature and a man who has simply stopped asking questions because the answers are inconvenient. Marcus has always, since he was small, preferred the second kind of peace. His father used to say the same thing about him, gently, the year before he died. "He'll do the right thing," Wendell told me once, out on that porch, but only after somebody makes him look straight at it. I saw Renee Castellano again, by accident, at the pharmacy counter on the square the following week. She looked at me the way people look at someone they have decided, without quite admitting it to themselves, they have wronged. She was kind to me, overly kind, asking after my health, complimenting a scarf I was wearing that had belonged to my mother. Somewhere in the middle of that small talk, she said something she likely did not intend to say out loud. "Ashley's under a lot of pressure right now," Renee said, "more than she lets on. I keep telling her, family's supposed to be the soft place to land, but I don't think she sees it that way anymore. I think she sees the house as the only asset left that isn't already spoken for." "Is that what she calls it?" I asked. "An asset." Renee's face did something complicated, caught between loyalty to her business partner and the plain discomfort of a woman who had just heard herself repeat a sentence she probably should not have. "I shouldn't have said that." "Forget I said that, Deborah. I won't repeat it," I told her, which was true in the sense that I never once told another living soul what Renee Castellano said to me at the pharmacy counter that October afternoon. I simply wrote it down instead. Dated. Filed. One more small stone added to a wall that was quietly becoming too tall for anyone to climb over without me knowing. I thought about that word the whole drive home. Asset. Not home. Not family. Not the place where a boy learned to ride a bicycle in the front yard while his father held the seat and jogged alongside him, laughing, telling him not to look down. Asset, the word a stranger uses for a thing they intend to spend. 2 weeks after that Sunday dinner, Marcus came to me directly, alone, on a Tuesday evening. Ashley was out at what she called a client meeting, and I had come to understand it was more likely a meeting with whoever was calling about the loan. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where he used to do his homework as a boy. He had a single folded document in his hand instead of a whole folder, which told me Ashley had grown careful about what she let him carry. "Mom, I need you to sign something. It's simple. It's just adding my name to the deed. As a co-owner, that's all. In case anything ever happened to you suddenly, so I wouldn't have to go through probate, so everything could just transfer smooth." I looked at the paper without touching it. "Who drew this up, Marcus?" "A service online. It's standard. Lots of families do it. Did Ashley ask you to bring this to me?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything the paper itself had not. She thought it made sense. For the family. So there's no complications later. "There won't be any complications," I told him gently. Some part of me still loved the boy underneath the man sitting across from me, trying so hard not to look at his own hands. "The deed already says exactly what it needs to say, and it has for 3 years. I'm not signing anything tonight that I haven't had a lawyer look at first, same as I've told you before. You don't trust me." His voice cracked slightly on the word trust. For a moment, he sounded exactly like the boy who used to hand his father nails on that porch, wanting so badly to be needed for something real. "I love you," I said. "Those aren't always the same thing, and you're old enough now to understand the difference." He sat there a moment longer, turning the folded paper over in his hands, without unfolding it again. For just a second, I saw something in his face that reminded me of the boy who used to cry at the kitchen table over math homework he was certain he could never learn. Frustrated at himself, in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else. "Ashley says you've never really accepted her," he said, quieter now. "She says you still treat her like a guest after 6 years of marriage." "I treat her exactly as well as she treats this house," I said. "That's not a judgment, Marcus. That's an observation. When she starts treating it like a home instead of an asset, I expect our relationship will follow right along behind. She doesn't think of it as an asset. Then she's never once said that word to anyone in my hearing," I said. That was true in the narrowest sense, since I had heard it from Renee at the pharmacy counter, and not from Ashley herself. I let him believe I meant something smaller than I did. Some truths a mother doles out only as fast as a son can actually use them. That could take years. It took your father and me 11 years to pay off this house after he died, I said. I've got the patience for years, baby. The question was always whether you did, and whether you're finally willing to let it be slow instead of easy. He left the paper on the table when he went upstairs. I photographed it with my phone before I put it through the shredder in the hall closet. I had learned, by then, that evidence of what somebody tried is sometimes more valuable than evidence of what they succeeded at. I drove the photograph over to Harold the very next morning, along with everything else. Harold laid it beside the refinance application from 3 years earlier, beside the trust question Marcus had floated back in September, beside the fuse box note, beside the certified deed itself, 5 separate pieces of paper spanning 3 years. He looked at the whole spread across his desk the way I imagine a surgeon looks at a full set of scans before deciding exactly where to cut. "Deborah, this isn't one bad night at a dinner table anymore," he said. "This is a pattern. A refinance attempt 3 years ago. A pressure campaign building since spring. A direct ask for co-ownership just last night. Whatever protection your husband built into that fuse box, he built it because he saw exactly this shape coming. Maybe not the details, but the shape of it. A family member who keeps testing the same locked door, hoping one day it opens by accident." "It won't," I said. "No," Harold agreed. "It won't. But I think it's time we stop simply defending the door, Deborah. Start deciding when and how you want to open it yourself, on your own terms, in front of the people who need to see it opened." By November, I had a folder an inch thick, dated notes on every conversation, a photocopy made discreetly at the library in town where nobody would think twice about an older woman using the machine, of an envelope corner I'd glimpsed on the hall table. Enough of the return address to confirm it was the same Atlanta lender Renee had mentioned. Harold's own running log, matching mine almost date for date, and Wendell's note from the fuse box, still in my apron pocket most days now. I had started carrying it the way some people carry a verse of scripture, not for luck, as a reminder of exactly whose voice I was answering to. I sat with Pastor Odell one Sunday that November, after service, in his small office behind the sanctuary at Mount Nebo. I needed to say some of it out loud to somebody who had known me longer than Harold Denby, longer even than Yolanda. A man who had baptized Marcus as a baby and buried Wendell and watched me sing alto in the same choir loft for 40 years. "You look burdened, Sister Whitcomb," he said, the way he always greets me, gentle and direct at once. I told him some of it, not all of it. Some things a person needs to hold a little longer before they can hand them even to their pastor. I told him my son had grown unkind in ways I did not recognize. I told him I was building a quiet response to it, on paper, patiently, the way I had built everything worth keeping in my life, Pastor Odell listened the way he always listens, without rushing to fill the silence. When I finished, he was quiet a moment longer before he spoke. Scripture doesn't ask us to be doormats, Deborah, he said. It asks us to be just. Sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do for a child who's lost his way is to let the truth catch up to him in full daylight, instead of shielding him from it one more season. You've spent your whole life being the one who absorbs the hard things so nobody else has to feel it. I don't believe the Lord asks that of you forever. I thought about that sermon without a pulpit the whole drive home, past the hardware store, past the church cemetery where Wendell lies under a stone I chose myself. Granite, plain. His name and his years and one line underneath it that I picked without asking anybody's permission. Loved his family with his whole hands. I had meant it as a tribute to a man who built porches and raised a good boy and never once raised his voice in 31 years of marriage. Sitting in the church parking lot that November afternoon, I understood it had become something else, too. A small, quiet instruction to myself about exactly what kind of love I still owed my son and exactly what kind I no longer did. Ashley grew visibly worse through the middle of November. I watched it happen the way you watch a fever climb on a chart, in small increments that only add up to something serious when you step back and look at the whole trend line. She stopped sleeping past 6 most mornings, pacing the kitchen with her phone already pressed to her ear before I'd even started the coffee. She snapped at Marcus over things that had nothing to do with him. A dish left in the sink, a light left on, the particular meanness of a person whose real fear has nowhere else to go. Twice that month, I answered the house phone to find a man on the other end asking, in the careful, neutral voice collections agencies train into their people, whether Ashley Whitcomb was available to discuss an outstanding balance. I told them both times that she was not home. I wrote the date down, and the caller's name, and the company he said he worked for, and I added it to Harold's growing file the same afternoon. "They're calling the house now," Harold said when I told him. "That's not a good sign for her, Deborah. When a lender starts calling secondary numbers, it usually means they've stopped believing the primary contact is going to answer honestly." "She's drowning," I said, and I said it without malice. Whatever Ashley had become in my house, whatever she had planned on my back porch in a voice she thought carried no further than the hallway, I had also watched her come to my table as a shy new bride once, uncertain, a little too eager to please. Some part of me still grieved what she might have been, if fear had not curdled into something colder in her by the time she reached my dining room. "Drowning people reach for whatever's closest," Harold said. "In this case, that happens to be your house. I want you prepared for the possibility that she pushes harder before Thanksgiving, not less hard. Desperate people do not calm down as the deadline nears. They accelerate." I thought about that phone call for days afterward, replaying it the way you replay a patient's vitals after a bad shift, looking for the exact moment things turned. Ashley had not always been unkind. I try to be fair to the woman she was when Marcus first brought her home. Nervous, a little too eager, complimenting my cooking twice as often as it needed complimenting, asking careful questions about the family she was marrying into. Somewhere between that nervous young bride and the woman pacing my porch with a business collapsing under her, something in her had hardened into a shape I did not recognize. I have wondered since how much of that hardening was her own doing, and how much of it was simply what happens to a person who convinces herself, one small justification at a time, that an old woman's comfort matters less than her own survival. I did not excuse it, but I understood it. 31 years on a hospital floor teaches you to understand almost anything a frightened person does. Understanding is not the same as agreeing it was right. I have watched plenty of frightened people do terrible things at 3 in the morning. Family members mostly, standing at a bedside making decisions out of panic instead of love. And I learned a long time ago that fear makes people smaller than they actually are, if you let it run the whole show. He was right. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, Ashley cornered me in the kitchen while Marcus was out. For the first time in 2 years, she dropped the careful politeness entirely. "Deborah, I need you to understand something," she said, standing too close, her voice pitched low and fast. "This house is worth almost $300,000, sitting here doing nothing, while people who actually need it are struggling. I'm not asking you to give it away. I'm asking you to be reasonable about what family means. Marcus's father would have wanted his son taken care of." I set down the dish towel I was holding. "Wendell built this house's porch with his own 2 hands," I said. "Level, unhurried, the same voice I have used my whole life to say the thing that matters most, as quietly as possible. He wanted his son taken care of by being raised right, not by being handed something he never earned and never will understand the weight of. You don't get to tell me what my husband would have wanted, Ashley. You never met him." Something flickered across her face then. Not quite shame, closer to the recognition of a woman realizing, too late, that she had finally said the true thing out loud instead of the careful thing, and that the true thing had cost her whatever ground she thought she was standing on. "I'm just trying to protect my family," she said, quieter now. "So am I told her. "We've just never once agreed on who's in it." She left the kitchen without another word. I stood there a long moment with the dish towel back in my hands. I thought about the fuse box note in my apron pocket. I thought, not for the first time, that Wendell had somehow known, years before either of us could have named it, exactly what kind of storm this house would eventually need to weather, and exactly whose hands it would need to weather it in. I called Harold that same evening and told him what Ashley had said, word for word. He was quiet on the line for a moment before he answered. "She's telling you her plan out loud now," Harold said. "That's not caution anymore, Deborah. That's a woman who believes she's already won and doesn't feel the need to hide it. Think carefully about whether you want to move before Thanksgiving or whether you want to let her walk all the way to the table first." "The table," I said without hesitating. "She built her whole plan around that table, Harold. I intend to let her stand on it when it gives way." "That's a harder path," he said. "It means one more week of biting your tongue in your own house." "I've bitten my tongue in this house for 2 years," I told him. "One more week won't kill me. It'll just be the last week I ever have to do it." The second Thanksgiving was coming. Ashley had already announced she'd be hosting again. The same crowd. Renee, and a new banker she'd been talking up all fall, a man named Gregory Voss who sat on the loan committee at a bank 2 towns over. I understood, the moment I heard his name, exactly what that dinner was going to be. It was not a holiday. It was a performance, staged in my own dining room, for an audience of one man who needed to believe the collateral behind Ashley's business was as solid as she claimed. I did not tell Marcus what I knew. I did not warn Ashley. I set my table the way I always set it. The good cloth. Wendell's mother's silver. The peach cobbler cooling on the counter. I called Harold Denby on the Tuesday before, and I asked him one question. "Will you come to Thanksgiving dinner, Harold, as a guest? Come to the front door like anyone else?" There was a pause on the line, then, quietly, the same gray stillness in his voice I'd heard back in August. "You're ready." "I've been ready since March," I told him. I was just waiting on them to be ready, too. The week before Thanksgiving, I drove to Harold's office one more time. I asked him to do something I had been turning over in my mind since the note in the fuse box first surfaced. Pull every piece of paper Marcus had ever signed involving this house. going back as far as the county kept records. Harold said it would take him a few days. He called me on a Monday, and his voice had a different weight to it than I had heard from him in 38 years of knowing the man. Deborah, I found something you need to see in person. I drove in that afternoon. He had a single page waiting on his desk, a refinance application, 3 years old, filed with a regional lender and later withdrawn. My son's name and signature at the bottom of it, dated the same month he had asked me to co-sign that loan, and I had told him no. He tried anyway, Harold said quietly. After you refused him, he went to a lender directly and applied to refinance this house in his own name, listing himself as owner, claiming the property was his primary residence and unencumbered. The application lists this address. It lists an estimated value. It lists Marcus Whitcomb as sole owner. Harold looked up at me. It was denied, Deborah, because the title search came back showing your name, not his. But he signed it. He attested, under penalty of law, that he owned a house that has never once, not for a single day, belonged to him. I sat with that a long moment. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to grief. There is a particular kind of pain in learning your own child once tried to claim something that was never his to claim, quietly, 3 years before he ever said a cruel word to you at a dinner table. Keep that page separate, I told Harold. I want it ready. For what? For the day he finally reads his own name on something he thought he'd never have to answer for. Harold nodded slowly, filed it, dated it. I drove home that afternoon past the hardware store on the square, past Mount Nebo Baptist where my mother used to sing, past the whole small, quiet town that had raised me and watched me bury a husband, and was about to watch me do something else entirely. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, my granddaughter came to visit. Not Marcus and Ashley's. They have no children yet, but my brother's granddaughter, a girl named Imani. 17, sharp as a tack, calls me Aunt Deb, has done since she was small enough to sit on my knee during service at Mount Nebo. She came by herself, on the bus from Macon, to bring me a plant for the porch. She stayed for supper. Somewhere between the green beans and the cobbler, she looked at me across the table with the particular directness only teenagers still allow themselves. Aunt Deb, is something wrong in this house? I asked her what made her think that. You look tired in a different way than usual, she said. Not sick tired, waiting tired. I laughed a little in spite of myself. 17 years old, and she had already learned to read a room better than half the grown women at my church. Your great-uncle used to say the same thing about my face when I was working a hard rotation. Said I had two kinds of tired, and he could always tell them apart across a whole parking lot. What's the difference? Sick tired means something's already happened to you, I said. Waiting tired means you can feel something coming, and you're saving your strength on purpose, so you have it when the moment finally arrives. Imani considered that a moment, turning her fork over in the cobbler without eating it. So something's coming. Something's already here, baby, I told her. I'm just deciding exactly when to meet it. I did not tell her everything. She was 17, and some weights are not hers to carry yet. But I told her enough. Her Uncle Marcus and his wife had put some strain on the house. I was handling it the way I handle everything, quietly and on paper. She should not worry herself over an old woman who has survived worse than one bad Thanksgiving. Imani listened the way her grandfather, my own brother, used to listen. Still and serious, the same way he used to sit through my mother's long stories at the supper table without once interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. You raised half this family up, Aunt Deb. Church knows it. Everybody on this side of Cedar Hollow knows it. Whatever you're building over there in that folder of yours, And I had not told her about the folder, not directly, but she is sharper than I give her credit for. I hope it lands exactly the way it needs to. She stayed the night in the guest room, the one Ashley had claimed for her sewing that was never sewing. In the morning, before she caught her bus back to Macon, she helped me carry the good silver up from the cellar without being asked. She polished each piece at the kitchen table while I made her breakfast. I thought, watching her work, that this was the kind of help Marcus used to give without being asked. Before a woman from a bigger town taught him that helping was something you calculated instead of something you simply did. Imani asked me, before she left, whether she could come back for Thanksgiving itself. I told her yes. I did not tell her why I wanted her there, but some part of me knew, even then, that I wanted at least one person at that table who loved me for reasons that had nothing to do with what I owned. There was one more thing that happened that week. Small. It belongs in this record, same as everything else. I went into town on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving to pick up extra folding chairs from the church hall, since Ashley's guest list had grown past what my own dining chairs could seat. The young man at the rental counter, a boy no older than 20 working the register at the hardware store where his family had worked for 2 generations, looked at my address on the form and said, not unkindly, but not thinking either, "Oh, Bellhaven Road. That's a nice street. Didn't realize they let, that's a nice area for your people to be out that far." I have heard versions of that sentence my whole life, in different clothes, spoken by different mouths. Meant, I believe, as something other than cruelty, and landing exactly like it anyway. I did not raise my voice. I looked at him steady, the way I look at a chart I know is wrong. I said, "My husband built that house's porch with his own hands the year our son was born, and we paid every dollar of it off ourselves, on a delivery driver's route and a nurse's paycheck, same as anybody else's people do." He went red. He apologized, quick and flustered. I told him it was all right, because it mostly was. I signed for the chairs and drove home. I did not write that one down in the folder. Some things do not need a date. They need only to be carried, the way you carry every small weight your whole life, so that when a larger one finally comes, you already know exactly how to hold it without your hands shaking. That Thanksgiving morning, I rose before anyone else in the house, the way I always have. I put the turkey in early. I set the table with Wendell's mother's silver. I placed my own chair, my actual chair, back at the head of the table where it had always belonged, before Ashley moved it the year before. Nobody said anything about it. Ashley glanced at it once when she came downstairs and said nothing. I understood she had decided, for reasons of her own, not to fight that particular battle on a morning that mattered more to her than a chair. Harold Denby arrived at the house before anyone else that morning, quietly, through the back door I had left unlocked for exactly that purpose. I walked him into the den where he could wait unseen until I called for him. He had the leather folio with him already. Inside it, in the order we had agreed on the night before, sat the deed, the refinance application, and a fresh copy of the fuse box note I had finally allowed him to photograph, so the original could stay safe in my apron pocket where it belonged. "You're certain about the timing?" Harold asked me once more, setting his cup down. The same question he had asked 3 times already that week. After the toast, I told him, whatever he says, however long it takes him to say it, let him finish it first, so nobody can say later that I cut him off before he'd shown everyone exactly who he'd become. Harold nodded and settled into the den with a cup of coffee and the local paper. A lawyer waiting on a signal the way he had waited on signals his whole career. Patient, unhurried, entirely certain of the ground beneath him. He had told me once, years ago, that the hardest part of his job was never the paperwork. It was waiting on a client to be ready to use it. Some clients, he said, waited months. Others waited years. I had waited 3, and I did not regret a single one of them. The guests began arriving at 2. Renee first, tense and overly bright, complimenting my centerpiece twice in the same breath, the way people do when they are nervous about something that has nothing to do with centerpieces. Then Gregory Voss, the banker. Tall and pleasant, exactly the kind of compose that men get when they are used to being believed. He shook my hand warmly at the door and told me my home was lovely, the kind of compliment men like that pay to a room they are quietly appraising. Then, over the next half hour, the 12 family guests who had sat at my table every year for 2 decades, the same faces, the same easy laughter. My cousin Yolanda first through the door with a pecan pie she insists on bringing every year, though nobody has ever asked her to. Then aunts and uncles and second cousins filing in with the particular warmth of people who have never once doubted they were welcome in this house. Amani arrived last, 17 and sharp-eyed, hugging me tight at the door and whispering, "You look ready, Aunt Deb," before she went to help Yolanda in the kitchen. I felt something settle in my chest, having at least one person under that roof who had come only to be with me and wanted nothing else from the day at all. We sat down at 4. I served the turkey and the dressing and the greens my mother taught me to cook with a ham hock and patience, and the sweet potato pie and the peach cobbler. I moved around that table the way I have moved around it for 20 years, filling glasses, offering seconds, asking Gregory Voss twice more about his drive and his family and whether he'd had a chance to try the greens. Dignity, whatever else it is also simply continuing to be gracious to people who do not yet know they are standing on ground about to give way. I served the meal the way I always do. I refilled glasses before I filled my own plate. I smiled at Gregory Voss and asked him about his drive. He told me it was no trouble at all. I noticed Ashley watching that exchange with the particular attention of a woman checking that her stage set was holding. It held, right up until the moment it did not. Marcus stood near the end of the meal, glass in hand, the same posture he'd had the year before. I felt the whole room settle into the shape of a toast. Some part of me, the part that had been waiting 11 months for exactly this moment, went very still and very ready. "I just want to say," Marcus began, smiling around the table, "how grateful Ashley and I are to have you all here, and especially grateful for the support of some of the newer faces joining us." He nodded toward Gregory Voss, who inclined his head graciously. "This house has been in our family a long time, and it's meant so much to be able to open it up and share it. And Mom, of course, keeps everything running." A small laugh went around the table, warm, easy. I recognized the shape of what was coming a half second before he said it, because I had heard its cousin exactly 1 year earlier. "Mom, why don't you go on and get yourself a plate once we're all settled? You've been on your feet all day." It was gentler this time. That was almost worse. He had learned, in a year, to dress the same instruction in kinder clothes, the same message wearing a nicer coat. I understood in that instant that nothing between us had actually changed. The boy who told me to eat after the guests left had simply learned to say it more softly, to the same effect. I set down the gravy boat. "Marcus," I said, my voice exactly as level as it always is, "before anyone gets comfortable, I'd like everyone to meet somebody." I walked to the front door myself. Harold Denby stood on the porch Wendell built, in a gray suit, a leather folio under one arm. I brought him in the way you'd bring in any guest. Warmly, by the hand almost. I sat him at the table in the empty chair beside mine, the chair that had been empty all afternoon because I had told Ashley, weeks earlier, that I was inviting an old friend, and she had not thought to ask who. "Everyone, this is Harold Denby," I said. He's kept this family's legal papers for 38 years. He drew up the deed to this house. I asked him to come today because there's something I think everybody at this table deserves to hear plainly, in the open, the way things ought to be said. Marcus's smile did not fall right away. It held for a second, then two. The particular held smile of a man whose body understands before his mind does that something has gone very wrong. Mom, what is this? This, I said, is me finally answering the question you asked me at this table 1 year ago, without ever using those words. You asked me to eat after the guests left. I've decided today we're all going to eat the truth first. Nobody at that table moved. Gregory Voss set his fork down slowly, the polished composure of a banker recognizing, faster than most, that he had walked into a room where the ground had already shifted. Ashley's hand found Marcus's sleeve under the table. I watched her face do something I had waited a long time to see. The particular drain of color that happens when a woman realizes the stage she built is not the one she is standing on anymore. Harold, I said, would you show everyone what's recorded at the county on this house? Harold Denby opened his leather folio the way he opens every folio. Slow, unhurried. A man who has never once needed to raise his voice to be believed. He drew out the first page and set it on the table where the light caught it, turning it so Gregory Voss in particular could read it clearly. This is a certified copy of the warranty deed to this property, Harold said. His voice carried the flat, clear weight of 38 years of practice, recorded with the county 3 years ago this past spring. Sole owner, Deborah Faye Whitcomb. No other name appears anywhere on this document. Not a spouse's name, not a child's name, not a trustee's name. This house has belonged to one person and one person only for 3 full years. That's not news, Marcus said. His voice had gone tight and fast, the way it always does when he's cornered and reaching. Mom's always owned the house, everybody knows that. I don't understand what this has to do with. I'm not finished, Harold said, gently. There was something almost kind in how he said it, the kindness of a man about to do something necessary and unpleasant in the same breath. He drew a second page from the folio. This is a refinance application filed 3 years ago, the same year the deed transfer was recorded. It lists this address. It lists an estimated market value of $290,000. It lists the applicant as sole owner of an unencumbered primary residence. Harold turned the page so it faced Marcus directly. The signature on this application is yours, Marcus. Your name, your handwriting, attesting under penalty of law that you owned a house that has never, for a single day in your life, belonged to you. I watched my son read his own signature the way you watch a man realize, slowly, that the ground he thought was solid had already given way beneath him months earlier, and he simply had not noticed the fall yet. That was denied, Marcus said. His voice had dropped to something smaller. That application was denied. That doesn't mean. It was denied, Harold agreed, because the title search came back showing your mother's name and not yours, which means the only reason this house was not put at risk 3 years ago is that the county record already protected it before you ever tried. You didn't fail to take the house, Marcus. You tried, and the paper stopped you before your mother even knew you had tried. The table had gone entirely silent now. The particular silence I remembered from the year before, except this year it did not belong to me alone. It belonged to everyone. I watched it land on each face in turn the way anesthesia settles over a room. Renee staring at her plate. Gregory Voss with his hands folded very still on the table. The 12 family guests who had eaten at this table for 2 decades, looking anywhere but at my son. Ashley, I said, turning to my daughter-in-law directly for the first time since Harold had sat down. I know about the loan. I know it's 4 months behind. I know you told your sister on my own back porch that this house would clear it once I was gone. Because old women don't live forever, and paperwork sorts itself out eventually in a patient family's favor. I heard every word. Ashley's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. I never, Deborah, I would never actually. I heard you say it, I said quietly, without raising my voice at all. I did not need to raise it. I wrote the date down that same night. Gregory Voss cleared his throat. When he spoke, his banker's voice had lost every trace of its earlier warmth. Mrs. Whitcomb, Ashley told me directly that the equity in this property was being structured to support her business line of credit. She told me the family was in agreement. She told me a refinance was already in motion. He looked at Ashley, then at the deed still sitting in the middle of the table. I came here today, in part, to get comfortable extending additional terms based on that representation. I am no longer comfortable with anything I've heard in the last 5 minutes. Garrett, I can explain, Ashley started. Voss held up one hand, not unkindly, but with the particular finality of a man closing a door. You can explain it to your loan committee, he said. Not to me, and not today. He stood buttoning his jacket and did not sit back down. I let that sit a moment. Then I reached into my apron pocket, where I had kept it now for nearly a year, and drew out the yellowed note, folded twice. I set it on the table beside the deed and the refinance application. 3 pieces of paper in a row, telling one long story from 3 different years. There's one more thing, I said. My husband Wendell left this taped inside our fuse box. I don't know exactly when, sometime before he passed 6 years ago. I found it by accident, in the dark, fixing a breaker at last year's Thanksgiving, while all of you sat at this table and ate without me. I unfolded it and read it aloud, slow, the way Wendell used to talk, with the little pauses he always put between his thoughts, as if each one cost him something and was worth it. Whatever they tell you this house is worth, remember what it cost. Keep the paper safe. I set it down beside the deed. He knew something was coming, long before I understood it myself. He built this house's protection into the ground before he ever saw the shape of what would try to take it. I have spent this last year keeping that paper exactly as safe as he asked me to. Marcus had both hands pressed flat against the table now, staring at his father's handwriting. When he spoke, his voice had lost every bit of its earlier bright ease. Mom, I didn't. I would never have actually let it get that far. Ashley said it was just paperwork. She said it would never actually come to anything. You signed an application claiming you owned my house, I said. You did that 3 years ago, before you ever said one unkind word to me at this table. The cruelty didn't come first, Marcus. The signature came first. Everything after that was just what it looked like once you stopped being afraid of getting caught. I did not raise my voice through any of it. That was the part, I would learn later, that unsettled the table most of all. More than the deed, more than the letter, more than Gregory Voss folding his napkin and rising from his chair without another word to either of them. A woman who had served 18 plates without eating a single bite of her own dinner the year before had simply, calmly, quietly set the truth down on the table in the order it happened and let everyone at that table read it for themselves. Gregory Voss left first. A brief nod to me, none at all to Ashley, his coat already half on before he reached the front door Wendell had built the porch beside. Renee went next, quieter, mumbling something about an early morning, unable to meet Ashley's eyes on her way out. The 12 family guests who had passed the rolls without a word the year before sat frozen a moment longer. Then, one at a time, they began to rise too, murmuring thanks for the meal, avoiding my son and daughter-in-law's faces the way you avoid looking directly at a wreck on the highway, even as you slow down to see it. My cousin Yolanda was the last to leave. She stopped beside my chair on her way out and took my hand in both of hers, the way she used to when we were girls at Mount Nebo together. "Deborah Fay," she said, quiet enough that only I could hear it. "I have known you 40 years, and I have never once seen you raise your voice, and I have never once seen anybody need you to." I held her hand a moment. I did not answer. Some things do not need an answer, and she understood that, and she let herself out. Marcus sat where he was after everyone had gone, his hand still flat on the table, staring at the 3 pages laid out before him as though staring might rearrange what they said. Ashley had not moved either, her wine glass untouched, her face gone somewhere past color into something closer to gray. "Mom," Marcus said finally. His voice had lost the last of its edges, gone thin and young, in a way I had not heard from him since he was a boy, asking why his father wasn't coming home from the hospital. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "Harold's going to explain some things to you both, calmly, because that's his job. I'm going to go put the coffee on, because that's mine." I rose and gathered a few of the plates, out of habit more than anything. I walked into my own kitchen, the kitchen Wendell built the counters in himself the same summer he built the porch. I stood there a moment with my hands flat on the cool tile. I let myself feel, for the first time in almost a year, the full weight of everything I had been carrying since a Thanksgiving night, when my own son told me I could eat once his guests were satisfied. I did not cry. It would be easy to say I came close, because that is what people expect from a story like this one. But the truth is, I did not come close. Something in me had gone past crying a long time ago, into a place that was clear and steady and entirely my own. The same place I used to go when a patient's numbers dropped and the whole room needed somebody not to be afraid. I made the coffee. I set out cups for everyone, even Ashley, even Marcus. Dignity, my mother always told me, is not about what you deny people. It is about what you refuse to let them take from you. When I came back in with the tray, Harold was speaking quietly to both of them, laying out, in his careful lawyer's voice, exactly what came next. "The deed is not in question," Harold was saying, as I set the cups down. "It never has been. What is in question now is what a bank does when it learns a business owner represented collateral she did not own, and what a lender does when it learns an applicant attested falsely on a prior filing. Those are not questions I can answer for either of you. They belong to the institutions you brought into this house yourselves." Marcus put his face in his hands. "I never meant for it to get this far, Mom. I swear to you. I don't know what I thought. I thought if I just went along with what Ashley said, it would somehow work itself out before it actually mattered. It mattered the day you signed your name to a house that was never yours," I said. "Everything since then has just been you finding out how much." Ashley had not spoken since Gregory Voss walked out. When she finally did, her voice had none of the polish it usually carried. "What happens to the business?" "That's not my question to answer either," Harold said, not unkindly. "But I'd imagine a lender who just learned his collateral never existed is going to want a very serious conversation with you before Monday." He closed his folio slowly, the way a man closes a book he already knows how it ends. He was right. Within a week, Gregory Voss's bank sent formal notice. It was reviewing the credit line extended to Ashley's showroom, in light of what it called material misrepresentation regarding collateral. 2 weeks after that, the Atlanta lender behind the loan she had never mentioned to a single person in my house called the balance due in full. They were unwilling to extend further terms once word reached them, through channels I never asked Harold to explain, that the property she had described as available family collateral belonged solely and permanently to someone who had never once offered it. Ashley's showroom on Cotton Avenue closed its doors in January. The gold lettering on the window got painted over within the month by whoever leased the space next. It sat empty most of that winter before a new tenant finally took it. A bakery, of all things, and the smell of fresh bread drifted out onto Cotton Avenue by spring. Harold called me in December to tell me the county had also opened a file, a separate matter from the bank's own review, after the refinance application from 3 years back was flagged for a routine fraud audit once the title dispute became part of the public record. A young investigator named Patrice, with a state badge and a thick folder of her own, came to see me at the house one afternoon. Polite and thorough, asking careful questions about dates and signatures, taking notes in a hand almost as neat as my own charting used to be. "You kept remarkable records, Mrs. Whitcomb," she told me, near the end of our conversation, looking over the folder Harold had helped me organize. "Most people in your position don't. Most people just feel wronged and don't know how to prove it." 31 years of hospital charting, I told her. You learn that a feeling isn't worth much to anybody unless you can also hand them the date. She smiled at that, the first real smile of the visit. She told me the fraudulent refinance application alone was likely enough to warrant a formal referral, separate from whatever the bank decided to pursue on its own, and that my son should expect a letter in the new year. I did not ask what the letter would say exactly. Some things, once you have set them in motion honestly, you allow the institutions to finish in their own time, at their own pace, without a mother hovering over every page. Marcus did receive that letter, in February. A formal notice from the state regarding the false attestation on his 3-year-old application. Harold reviewed it with him at the office rather than have him face it entirely alone, because whatever my son had done, he was still my son, and I did not believe cruelty was the correct answer to cruelty. The matter was resolved eventually, with a fine and a formal record, rather than anything harsher. Harold told me privately that the young investigator, Patrice, had argued for leniency herself, noting in her own report that the actual harm had been caught and reversed before it ever touched the elderly homeowner it was aimed at. "That's you," Harold said when he told me. "She means you, Deborah. The system worked because you made it work, quietly, years before it ever had to." I did not celebrate that. It would be easy to tell this part as though I felt triumph watching a woman lose her business. And I did not. I felt the particular tiredness that comes after a long shift, the kind where you have done everything correctly and somebody still did not make it, and you go home anyway, because the next shift is coming regardless of how the last one ended. Ashley called me once, in late January, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it, asking whether I understood what I had done to her life. I told her, gently, that I had not done anything to her life. I had simply stopped protecting her from the consequences of what she had already done to mine. The two things, though they might feel identical from where she was standing, were not the same at all. She did not have much to say after that. We have not spoken since. I have made my peace with the possibility that we never will again. Marcus and Ashley moved out in February to an apartment 2 towns over, closer to wherever Ashley found work next. A smaller life than the one she had tried to build on the back of my paid-off house. They took the furniture they had brought with them and left the copper cookware behind in the pantry, still boxed, and I gave it to Yolanda's granddaughter for her first apartment. Marcus called me the week they left, alone, his voice quieter than I had heard it in years. Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but is there any way back from this? For us, for you and me? I thought about it a long moment before I answered. I did not want to give him an answer shaped by anger. I did not want to give him one shaped by a mother's blind forgiveness either. I wanted to give him the true one. There's always a way back, Marcus, I told him. But it doesn't run through this house anymore. And it doesn't run through anything you can sign or borrow or refinance your way into. It runs through you showing me, over years, not months, that you understand the difference between helping your mother and using her. I raised you to know that difference once, a long time ago, back when your father was still alive to remind you of it. I believe some part of you still remembers. Go find it and bring it back to me yourself, one honest year at a time. He did not answer right away. When he finally did, his voice had cracked in a way that reminded me, briefly and painfully, of the small boy who used to hand his father nails on that porch one at a time. I'll try, Mom. I don't know how yet, but I'll try. Start small, I told him. Call me on a Tuesday for no reason at all. Ask after my garden instead of my finances. Show up to help with something and don't wait to be asked twice. Trust isn't rebuilt with one big gesture, Marcus. It's rebuilt the same slow way this house was paid for. One honest payment at a time, for as long as it takes. I told him that trying, honestly and slowly, was the only door I was leaving open. I would know the difference between real effort and another performance the same way I have always known the difference. By the dates, by the follow-through, by whether his hands showed up when nobody was watching to see if they would. Imani came to stay with me most weekends that winter, filling the guest room that had briefly been Ashley's sewing room that was never sewing. We spent those Sundays the way I used to spend them with my own mother, cooking too much food for two people, going to service at Mount Nebo, sitting on the porch Wendell built, even in the cold, with 2 cups of coffee and a blanket across our knees. She helped me go through the house room by room that winter, the way you do after a long illness finally breaks, putting things back where they belonged before anyone else moved them. We found my mother's quilt still folded in the closet where Ashley had put it 2 years earlier. Imani helped me spread it back across the guest bed, smoothing the corners with the same careful attention she gave everything. She asked me, quietly, whether it made me sad to see how long it had sat there unused. A little, I told her. But it's back now. That's the part that matters. We reclaimed the sitting room too, the curtains I had kept folded in the attic rather than throw away. Some stubborn part of me had been certain I would need them again one day. I hung them back myself, standing on the same step stool Wendell used to hold steady for me. When I stepped down and looked at the room, it looked, for the first time in 2 years, entirely like the room I remembered raising my son in. Imani helped me choose a new lamp for the corner table, a small thing, $10 at a yard sale 2 streets over, and we both agreed it looked like it had always belonged there. Yolanda came by often that winter too, bringing her deviled eggs even when there was no occasion for them. One Sunday afternoon in January, sitting on my porch with coffee going cold in our hands, she finally said the thing she had clearly been holding back since that first autumn. "I'm proud of you, Deborah Faye," she said. "Not for what happened to Ashley's business. Lord knows I take no pleasure in anybody's ruin, even hers. I'm proud of how quiet you kept it. Most folks would have hollered that whole story from the church steps the day it happened. You just wrote it down and waited. That's the only way I know how to fight," I told her. I learned it on a hospital floor a long time before I ever needed it at my own table. Imani asked me the harder question one Sunday in March, almost a year to the day since I'd first sat in Harold's office holding the certified deed in my own hands. She wanted to know whether I regretted any of it. The whole quiet year of folders and dated notes and waiting. No, I told her. I regret that it took a sentence as small as eat after the guests leave to make me finally look straight at what your uncle had already tried to take 3 years before he ever said it. But I don't regret how I answered it. I answered it the only way I know how, quietly and on paper and in my own time. Marcus called again in April and then again in June, shorter calls each time, less pleading, more simply present, asking after my garden, my health, the roof I'd finally had re-shingled with money I no longer needed to hide from anyone. He did not ask about the house again. Not once, not even sideways, the way people sometimes circle a subject without ever naming it outright. I noticed that, the way I notice everything, I let it stand as the first real evidence that something in him might actually be shifting. Slowly, the way real change always does, without fanfare, one ordinary phone call at a time, long after anyone was still watching closely enough to see if he would. I invited him to Sunday dinner in August, alone, without Ashley. Whatever remained between them was theirs to sort out. None of my business to referee. He came looking thinner, humbler, in a way that suited him better than the confidence he'd worn during the years he lived under my roof, spending money that was never really his to spend. We ate at my table, just the two of us, roast chicken and rice, and the same green beans I have cooked every Sunday of his life. He asked, before we sat down, whether he could say grace, something he had not done in this house since he was a boy, and I told him yes, and he did, simple and short, thanking God for the food and for his mother, and for another chance to sit at this table. He helped me with the dishes afterward without being asked. He dried each plate carefully and set it back exactly where it belonged on the shelf, the way his father used to before him. Neither of us said much of anything across that whole quiet meal. It was, for the first time in longer than I could remember, simply enough on its own. Harold Denby still keeps my papers, same as he has for going on 40 years now. The certified deed still sits in his office safe, though these days it sits there simply as a record rather than a shield. Nobody in Cedar Hollow has tried to take this house from me since that Thanksgiving morning, when a banker closed his briefcase and left without another word to the woman who had staged the whole thing. I repainted the porch myself that spring, the same gray Wendell always used, sanding the rail down by hand the way he taught me the summer we first met. Imani came by most Saturdays to help. Yolanda brought lemonade out to us most afternoons. My whole small stretch of Bellhaven Road seemed to know, without anyone saying so directly, that something in that house had finally been set right. Pastor Odell stopped by once too, on his way to visit a member 2 doors down, and stood at the bottom of the steps admiring the fresh coat before he went on his way, saying only that the Lord does love a woman who finishes what she starts. An older neighbor from 2 doors down, Mr. Pettigrew, has watched this street for 60 years from his own front porch. He stopped by one afternoon while I was still sanding the rail and looked at the fresh gray paint a long moment before he spoke. Wendell would be glad to see that porch cared for again, he said. He built it to last, I told him. I'm just keeping my end of the promise. Mr. Pettigrew nodded slowly, the way old men nod when they have seen enough of life to recognize a true thing when it's said plainly in front of them. He went on his way, tipping his hat once toward the porch. I went back to sanding. When I was finished, I stood back and looked at it in the late afternoon light and thought that it looked, for the first time in 2 years, entirely like our house again, and nobody else's. Before I closed up the fuse box that day, I taped a new note inside it, in my own hand, folded the same way Wendell had folded his. Keep the paper safe. Whatever anyone tells you this house is worth, remember what it actually cost and who paid it. I signed it. I closed the little metal door, carried my chair back to the head of the table, and sat down,